What's up, everybody? I wanted to interrupt before the episode to give an apology that it's a day late. I'd rather it be a day late this time around than a whole week late. I got sick really bad last week, and it's still carrying into this one, so if I sound a little gross, if my voice sounds a little gross throughout this episode, that is why. Thank you for those of you that have been praying for me and whatnot. I've been given announcements via social media. If you do not follow The Dancing Toaster on Facebook or Instagram, please go do that. And if there's another social media platform that you'd prefer that I be using, man, please hit me up and let me know at thedancingtoasterpodcast@gmail.com. Let me know. I'd love to be able to have quicker access to you guys so that you know when weird things are going on, like the show being a day late. So in any case, today is our last stop on our journey around the top 5 places in the world where people are enjoying the Dancing Toaster. I hope you enjoy this, and I'm really sorry that it's late. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for your prayers, those that have been praying for my health. I really appreciate it. Feeling better than I was, but certainly not 100% yet. But I still love you.
Report suspicious activities and call 911 for immediate response. Expect delay.
Nobody else. Booking tags in from the south. Stand by. Flight 022. Maintain approach. You're clear for
Expect traffic delays and restrictions. Take personal security precautions to avoid becoming a victim of an attack. Avoid crowded public areas and gatherings.
maintaining 4,000 runway 8 kilo holding.
Do not travel in areas affected by the attack or in a known area of elevated virus activity. Keep emergency supplies accessible and a full tank of gas at all times.
Be careful.
Government officials insist that this is isolated incident different from the packet of
Amsterdam wears its beauty like a mask. By daylight, it's all postcards and promises. Bicycles leaning against bridges. Water glinting in canals like liquid glass. A city that pretends it's safe in the sunlight. But when the night falls, when the rain slicks cobblestones and the air tastes of iron, the mask slips. You see the cracks. You hear the whispers. The ghosts crawl out of the stones and they never forget. There's the Bloedstraat, or Blood Street. The name says it all. They whisper it came from the executions, from the bodies cut open at the Waag, the wayhouse where guilds once measured goods and maybe souls. Some say the blood poured down from the dike into this narrow street, soaking the stones. Others blame the friars, the Franciscan monastery that stood here long before neon and red lights. And then there's the Duke of Alba, the so-called Iron Fist of Spain. He brought the Council of Blood to these very blocks. History and legend clash in the shadows. Maybe the truth drowned in the red tide long ago. Then there's Spooksteeg, Ghost Alley, a name that hardly needs translation. Claustrophobic slit of passage hemmed in by old warehouses. According to legend, Helena and her sister both loved the same sailor. One act of jealousy turned deadly, and the guilt never let her rest. They say her spirit still stalks the alley, her scream stitched into the bricks, refusing to be forgotten. Next is Spinhuis, founded in 1597 as a woman's prison, where fallen women and the unlucky poor spun thread for the church's profit. Linen, cotton, hours of forced labor that blurred into days. The motto carved above the gate still sneers down. Punishment with kindness as its aim. They called it correction. The women called it hell. And across the street, a priest fell in love with a girl too young to know what the world meant. She was condemned to spin out the rest of her days inside the prison. He was spared, but shame drove him to a noose. They say he still swings in the night, condemned to repeat his final mistake. Many speak of Montelbaanstoren, the Montelbaan Tower. built in 1516 to watch the harbor, to hold back Utrecht's ambitions in foreign sales. Later they gave it a clock and a spire and the city called it Mad Jake, because the clock never told the right time. The locals laughed, but the ghost didn't. Legend says one year when war bled into the streets, a family fled into the tower. Panic drove them up the spiral stairwell. They never made it down alive. Every June 2nd, they climb again. You can hear their feet hammering the stone, running toward a doom they'll never outrun. And finally, the Schreierstoren, the Weeping Tower. The Weeping Tower carries a legend carved in sorrow. They say wives once stood and stared at the water's edge, crying as their men vanished into the seas that swallowed more than half. A memorial stone tells of a woman driven mad with grief. Whether born from legend or loss, the sorrow took root here. The tower wears the name like a scar. 5 locations, 5 names etched into stone. Bloedstraat, Ghost Alley, the Spinning House, the Mad Tower, and the Weeping Tower. Together they sketch the shadow side of Amsterdam, a city that dazzles by day and bleeds by night. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Dancing Toaster. This is Pastor Nelly, and today we conclude our journey to the top 5 places outside of the United States where people are enjoying the Dancing Toaster podcast. I apologize if my voice sounds a little gross. I was sick all last week with the vid, and I'm still a little bit under the weather, but definitely nowhere near as bad as last week. Today we venture into the heart of the Netherlands as we dive into 5 haunted locations in Amsterdam.
I don't know why you're doing this to yourself. You already said it was too much last week to cover 5 places.
Come on, Doc, you know this guy's a sucker for punishment. Hello, fellas. You're correct, Doctor.
I usually am.
Yes, I may have bitten off more than I could chew last time, but I did enjoy getting to talk about so many cool places. And no, Vinny, I'm no masochist. I just thought these 5 places warranted discussion, but I wasn't sure if there was enough to get a whole episode out of a single location. So it made sense, but I guess we'll see. Nah, this guy loves the pain. Anyways, before our deep dive, it's time for the thank yous. That's right, Vinny. First, thank you, Amsterdam. And of course, thank you to all my Dancing Toaster listeners in the Netherlands. I want to apologize because I have and I will butcher pronunciation of the places, the streets, the buildings today. Please forgive me. Charge it to my head, not my heart. I'm going to do the best I can, but I'm not making any promises. We also got to thank the Toasties. These are my patrons over on Patreon. They make the show possible. I love you guys and I'm so grateful for the support. Got a few new Toasties to thank and to welcome this week. Carly, Marshall, Jeff, and Josie, thank you guys so much for joining and welcome to the Toasty family. Again, your support makes this show happen and I thank you from the bottom of my heart. If you want to join them and help me do what I do, $5 a month, help support my work, get you early access to content, you get ad-free listening, you get access to exclusives, specifically a new show launching right around the corner, the Toaster Files. They'll be starting with something called MESS, the Ministry of Esoteric Supernatural Studies. My plan was to have that launch before the end of September, but I also wasn't planning on being taken out by the vid for a week. So that really hurt my schedule and threw all kinds of things off for the show and for church, so I'm thinking I'll release it at the 1-year anniversary of the show coming up during spooky season next month. If you can't support monthly or you feel led to support another way, head on over to buymeacoffee.com/The Dancing Toaster. Some prefer PayPal, you can do that too. If you want to rep the Dancing Toaster around your haunted streets, head over to my merch store. Get some Dancing Toaster gear at thedancingtoasterstore.printful.me. If you're just as strapped as me right now and you can't support the show in any of these ways, sharing the show is free. Telling others about it is free. You can leave me a review, leave a comment. All of these things are still huge. They feed the algorithms and they let other people know that the show is worth checking out. Thank you for those who are doing just that as well. I know you're doing that, not just because I see the comments, but I know you're telling others about the show because they're telling me.
Are you ever gonna get started or what?
Shut up, Doc. I got more awesome announcements. Last Friday, I was privileged to be a guest on Real Conspiracies, REEL Conspiracies.
Real Conspiracies is a weekly podcast hosted by PJ Williams that dives into the hidden layers of movies and video games, exploring themes of occult symbolism, secret meanings, and cultural conspiracies woven into popular entertainment. Each episode focuses on a specific film, show, or game, uncovering the stories beneath the surface and drawing connections between art, myth, and mystery. It's a show for listeners who enjoy pop culture with a twist of intrigue, where Hollywood meets hidden knowledge and every reel may reveal a deeper conspiracy. I got to hang out with PJ for over 2 hours and we had an amazing time talking about my favorite film of all time. You guys already know what it is, The Ghostbusters. That's coming out Thursday, October 2nd. I can't wait for you guys to hear it, and it's you guys that made it possible. PJ told me that it was a bunch of you that hit him up saying, you gotta check out The Dancing Toaster, you gotta check out The Dancing Toaster. And that just meant so much to me to hear. I was so humbled and honored. So again, thank you. You are why this show will succeed. Now, housekeeping aside, let's cross the pond and head over to the Netherlands. The Netherlands is a small but influential country in northwestern Europe, known for its flat landscapes crisscrossed with canals, fields of tulips, and a history of maritime power that once made it the center of global trade. Famous for windmills, dikes, and its mastery of water management, the nation has long been a symbol of resilience and innovation. It's a hub of art and culture that gave the world painters like Rembrandt and Van Gogh. Today, the Netherlands remains recognized for its engineering, agriculture, and cultural heritage, blending historic charm with modern innovation in a country that has shaped both European and world history. Amsterdam, the capital city, is both historic and cosmopolitan, a place where 17th century canal houses stand beside cutting-edge architecture and bustling neighborhoods alive with music, markets, and nightlife. Known as the Venice of the North, it grew from a medieval trading post into the heart of the Dutch Golden Age, and today it blends that heritage with a modern reputation for art and free-spirited culture. Museums like the Rijksmuseum and the Van Gogh Museum showcase its artistic legacy, while the Anne Frank House reminds the world of its wartime scars. Amsterdam thrives as a city of bicycles and boats, commerce and creativity, where history and modernity run side by side. But every city has two faces. By daylight, Amsterdam dazzles with art, history, and charm. When night falls, though, the canals grow darker. The stones remember older stories, and the past presses in from the shadows. Behind the beauty lies a city that has witnessed bloodshed, betrayal, and sorrow. Echoes that some say never left. Today we leave the museums and markets behind and step into that other Amsterdam. 5 places stand out, each with a name that carries weight like a tombstone. Let us begin with Bloedstraat.
This story is written in blood, a ledger of execution, superstition, and power carved into stone. They call it Bloedstraat, the Blood Street. Every city has its shadows. Some streets are just shortcuts lined with windows and whispers. Others carry the weight of centuries, and when you walk them at night, you can almost feel the ground breathe beneath your feet. Bloedstraat is one of those streets. It isn't just another alley in Amsterdam. It's a scar that never healed. To understand it, you start at the gatehouse of St. Anthony's Port, the Wachthuis. Built in 1488, or so the stone insists, though locals will tell you it had older bones long before the masons set their chisels to work. Picture it then, a turreted fortress rising above Nieuwemarkt, walls pressed tight against the canals, watching over the docks like a sentinel with no mercy. To the north, its gaze stretched to the Schreierstoren. To the south, it stared into the heart of the city. A gate, a guardian, a trap. The city watch made their home here. Not professional soldiers, but an army of volunteers, sworn in through guild privilege and sanctified by the church. They called them the Shooters Guild. Crossbows, muskets, pikes, each ranked by their weapon they held as if iron and wood were extensions of their souls. They were the city's shield. They were also its teeth. Merchants passed through the Wachthuis, their carts heavy with cargo. The weighhouse took its cut. Duties and taxes. A few extra coins slipped into the right hands. It was the machinery of commerce cloaked in authority. But the scales didn't only weigh goods. Some say they weighed human life. The stories say witches stood here. An accused girl would be ordered to step on the scales. If you were lighter than the official weights, you were condemned. If you matched or exceeded, you were cleared, but freedom wasn't free. You paid the toll, emptied your purse, and walked away branded by suspicion. It wasn't justice. It was extortion in the shadow of a crucifix. A perfect racket. 4 guilds claimed pieces of the Wachthaus: blacksmiths, painters, masons, and surgeons. Hendrik de Keyser left his mark above the mason's hall, carving stone that still sneers down from history. The surgeons took the highest chamber, christening it Theatrum Anatomicum. You've seen their handiwork immortalized in Rembrandt's The Anatomy Lesson of Dr. Nicholas Tulp. The painting doesn't show the stench of blood, the sawdust soaked with bile, the silence of men pretending to understand the soul by cutting into flesh. They needed fresh bodies, and they had them. This was the site of execution. Death wasn't an accident here, it was business. Witches, heretics, zealots, thieves, and other enemies of the crown, they were beheaded, burned alive, hanged, drawn, quartered, death by spectacle, crafted to send a message. The surgeons had an arrangement with the executioners. Keep the bodies as clean as possible. To the surgeons, a fresh corpse was more valuable than the life it had just taken. Knowledge grew from the scaffold, but so did the legend. When Napoleon's troops occupied Amsterdam, some say he brought the guillotine to the square. Metal kissed flesh with precision, the blade feeding a crowd hungry for order. The Waag stood on raised ground, built into the dike to keep out of the sea. Blood poured down from the scaffold, soaking into the cobblestones, trickling into the nearest street. That street became Bloedstraat. But death wasn't the street's only inheritance. In the 13th and 14th centuries, a Franciscan monastery stood there. Its grounds spread across the street plan that still exists, its graveyard hidden beneath today's homes. In 2001, workers digging foundations uncovered its bones. Stone walls, fragments of tile, remnants of a forgotten chapter. The friars ran what they called a blood room, a primitive hospital where the sick and injured came for mercy. Limbs were hacked, wounds were opened, blood ran into the gutters, further painting the street in crimson. And then came the Duke of Alba, Spain's Iron Fist. He brought the Inquisition with him, setting up shop in the monastery and turning it into the fortress of fear. They called his tribunal the Council of Blood, and the streets earned their name in spades. Anyone who resisted Spanish rule was executed. Anyone who questioned the church was silenced. Alba ruled with fire, rope, and iron, and the cobblestones drank every drop. The 20th century wasn't kinder. During the Nazi occupation, Jews were rounded up in Amsterdam and dragged through familiar checkpoints. The Waag, like so many old buildings, was turned into an instrument of bureaucracy and terror. From heretics to innocents, from zealots to families, the story was the same. Power demands blood, and Bloedstraat gave it. Today, the Bloedstraat looks like any other cut-through between Nieuwermarkt and the Oudezijds Achterburgwal. Neon lights, red curtains, rooms for rent by the hour. The commerce of flesh hasn't left. It just changed uniforms. But walk it after dark when the tour is thin and the air grows heavy. The monastery is gone. The guillotine dismantled, the scales long silent, but some say the street still breathes as history allowed. Walk it after dark and you might hear the moans and low cries that seem to seep from the walls. Others whisper about shadows that drift across the alley, figures that vanish before your eyes. A sudden chill presses down, heavy and uninvited, as though the air itself remembers the weight of 1,000 deaths. Locals tie it to the monastery that once stood there, its graveyard buried underneath the houses, its blood rooms forever etched in stone. Others blame the executions, the witches, the zealots, the heretics, cut down beneath the surgeon's watchful eye. Whether it's friars, martyrs, or nameless criminals, the dead never left. The ghosts of Amsterdam linger here, faceless and restless, in a place where centuries of blood once ran like water. This is Bloedstraat, where the city never forgets.
So the history is fascinating. It's really no wonder why people feel creeped out when they're there, especially if you're there at night. For a place with such a dark history and foreboding name, I thought the haunting was going to be a little more haunting, you know? I understand what you're saying, Vinny. With as much stuff as they say happened there, I too expected a bit more.
Moans in the wall, shadows slipping down an alley. Come on, that's not ghosts, that's acoustics and bad lighting. Old narrow streets amplify every sound. An argument 3 doors down can echo like it's whispering right in your ear. And shadows, in a district lit by neon candles and street lamps that never burn the same color twice, you'll see shapes dancing where nothing stands. As for the sudden chill, that's not restless spirits, that's a draft cutting down through medieval stone passages built to funnel air as well as people. And if you ask me, tying it all back to the monastery or the Inquisition is just ghost tour marketing. People hear a story, their brains supply the fear, and voila, Amsterdam's got itself a haunting. The only thing really haunting Bloedstraat is history itself, and history doesn't need to rattle chains to be terrifying.
Well, I certainly agree with that, Doc. Most monsters in the world wear human skin, and not in the Ed Gein Buffalo Bill kind of way. At least not all of them.
What in the world? Did you have to go there?
Well, I am the guy in the group chat that normally goes too far.
Remind me to never add you to any of mine.
Your loss. Anyways, before talking about whether or not this stuff is real or true, I'd like to discuss how much of the backstory is true. Bloedstraat is a narrow passage in Amsterdam's red light district, linking the Nieuwe Markt to the Oudezijds Achterburgwal. Historically, a Franciscan monastery once stood in this area, and during later renovations, workers uncovered remnants of old structures and burials beneath the street's houses. These discoveries confirm that the ground beneath Bloedstraat holds layers of history. But the most enduring explanation for the street's name is rooted in folklore. The idea that blood from executions at the nearby Way House once ran downhill into the alley, staining it in memory and reputation. Some accounts also connect the street's name to the Council of Blood, that tribunal led by the Duke of Alba during the Spanish rule of the Low Countries, which is historically well documented. In modern times, Bloedstraat has continued to bear a darker, more infamous identity, with prostitution forming part of its reputation. Other elements tied to Bloedstraat belong more to legend and ghost tour storytelling than to established history. There is no credible evidence that the gatehouse, sometimes called the Wachthaus, was ever used to weigh accused witches to decide their fates. People love adding details like this to further demonize the church and garner sympathy for witches. There's no hard proof for it, nor is there proof that the Surgeons Guild made special arrangements to preserve bodies from executions here for anatomical practice, or that the Way House was moved from Dam Square for such purposes. But what about claims that Napoleon personally installed a guillotine in Amsterdam around Bloedstraat? Well, that part is true. On July 27, 1811, Amsterdam witnessed the grim debut of the guillotine. Under French occupation, Napoleon's legal system brought the machine of death to the city, and its first victim was a 36-year-old murderer named Hendrik Eichel Itza, also recorded as Itza Itzazun. The execution took place at Nieuwe Markt, directly before the Waag, where crowds swarmed to see the blade fall. What they saw that day was more than a punishment, it was the arrival of a new order, a symbol of foreign power cutting into Dutch tradition. The guillotine shadow marked a turning point in the Netherlands, embedding itself in the city's long history of blood and spectacle.
Now what about that whole blood room thing? Is there any truth to that?
Unsubstantiated, my friend. It is mere folklore that the street's monastery contained a blood room where limbs were hacked and blood flowed into the street. These stories appear most often in tourist narratives and lack strong archival support. Taken together, Bloedstraat's story is a mix of fact and folklore. Its geography, monastery, archaeological finds, and ties to Spanish oppression are supported by history. Its darker legends, the flowing blood, witch trials, and haunted hospital rooms, persist in popular retellings and ghost tours.
So it's all nonsense and we can move on, right?
I didn't say that. There's been enough bloodshed and enough evil centered around that area that I'm positive evil spirits are there, as well as any red light district in the world. I just don't know if they're howling in the night.
Well, I don't know. It is a red light district.
Benny, cork it. PG, my friend.
All right. I'm sorry.
Are you surprised that he's a pervert? He does live in a basement, for crying out loud.
Why, Iota, I'm about to turn this into a blood street.
For crying out loud, would you both shut up? Anyways, let's keep moving. Our next stop in Amsterdam is Ghost Alley, or Spooksteeg.
This is a story about jealousy sharpened into murder. A curse that's been carved into the bricks. Welcome to the Spooksteeg. It hides in plain sight, just off the Zeedijk, squeezed between a nightclub and a record shop. A narrow cut through the city's veins running from the Oudezijds Achterbergwal to the Oudezijds Voorburgwal. The maps still show it, like a scar that never faded. Back in the 13th century, these were the back doors of warehouses, where barges slipped in from the canals, unloading goods into Amsterdam's beating heart. Today the alley is gated, locked at sundown, as if even the city itself wants to shut away what lingers there. The story they tell begins with two sisters, Helena and Dina. They worked hides in the family tannery, a trade steeped in the stink of chemicals and blood, fitting for this quarter of the red light district. Dina had a sailor, a man named Vot, but Helena wanted him too. Love turned to obsession, obsession turned to envy, and envy to murder. One day Helena pushed Dina down the tannery stairs. The crack of skull on stone silenced a sister forever. She called it an accident. No one questioned it. Soon after, she married Vot. But guilt is a poison that doesn't let go easy. It gnawed at her for 3 long years until her body gave out. On her deathbed, July 24th, 1733, she confessed to the man she'd stolen. Vot gave her no mercy. He cursed her soul to wander the alley for eternity. No absolution, no rest, just an endless sentence in the dark. 50 years later, the screams began. People claim they heard Helena's ghost tearing through the alley at night, screaming, moaning, reliving the murder of her sister in an endless loop. Locals christened it Spooksteeg, Ghost Alley. The police would come, they'd walk the stones, but they'd leave with nothing but goose flesh. No explanations, nothing solved. The newspapers picked it up. First the Algemeen Handelsblad in 1903, then the Het Parool later on. Each report kept the legend alive, ink feeding fire. On July 24th, 1953, 200 years to the day after her death, 200 people crowded into that alley, hoping to see Helena's restless spirit. Some swore they heard her, a scream cutting through the night like a blade. Others say it's nothing more than a tale, and that tale is why it's called Ghost Alley. A passageway where shadows don't just fall, they follow. Where the curse of Helena still drips from the brick, reminding anyone who listens that the city never forgets its sins.
Now let me just start by saying that no human being has the authority to curse anyone to such a degree that their soul is stuck on earth, or worse, stuck in some red light district alley. Volt can be as mad as he wanted, rightfully so if Helena was guilty of killing his first love, but he'd have no power, no say over her soul when she died.
Let me just start by saying that Volt ain't super loyal.
Well, you're not wrong. Hopping from one sister to the next is pretty scandalous. Now that we've gotten way ahead of ourselves, let's talk a little bit about Ghost Alley. Spooksteeg is a narrow passage in Amsterdam that shows up frequently in ghost tours and local folklore. The best-known legend tied to the alley tells of Helena, sometimes Helene, a tanner who murdered her sister Dina in order to steal her lover. According to the story, Helena covered up the crime, but years later confessed on her deathbed, only to be cursed by the betrayed sailor to wander the alley forever, an impossible feat as we noted. Since then, Spooksteeg has been linked with reports of spectral screams, moans, and shadowy figures, details often repeated on ghost walks and in popular accounts. The name itself, literally Ghost Alley, reinforces the association with haunting, though some historians note that this label only began appearing in the 19th century rather than the 18th.
Tell him my favorite part.
This thinking guy. I'm getting there, Doc. What the story lacks, however, is strong historical documentation. There are no confirmed records of a tanner named Helena in the early 1700s, no archival evidence of the precise date of her supposed death, and not even any proof of the oft-repeated tale that 200 people gathered in 1953 to catch a sight of her ghost. Likewise, claims of police investigations into the haunting seem more like narrative embellishments than documented events. In short, Spooksteeg's reputation rests largely on lore, a compelling story that has survived through retelling rather than written record, making it best presented as legend rather than verifiable history.
What? So this story's a dud?
I mean, unless some evidence can be found about Helena or Dina being around there in the 1700s or any record of their deaths at the time, all we have is word of mouth.
Wait a minute. But what about the records in the papers, right?
Well, only in papers that retold the legend 170 years later. And even if hundreds of people showed up 50 years after that to hear something...
Well, they were all heavily conditioned to hear it, weren't they?
Precisely. We need a little bit more evidence for this true crime ghost story. Moving on now, let us visit the Spinhuis.
This one's a tale of forbidden love and punishment without end. The kind of story that smells of damp stone and cheap mercy. Welcome to the Spinhuis. The year was 1597 when the city opened its doors, not to welcome women in, but to lock them away. They called it a correctional house run under the banner of the St. Ursula cloister, but correction was just a pretty word for control. The gate alone told the story. Hendrik de Keyser designed it in 1645, carving women bent to labor under the iron stare and stick of a matron. Above them, 2 rules were etched into the stone by P.C. Hooft, Amsterdam's great poet turned moralist. Strong is the hand of punishment, with kindness as its aim. Don't cry, but compel the goodness. Poetry weaponized as chains. Inside, the women worked, the name coming from the cotton they spun, sewed linen, brewed beer and mustard, their labor feeding the coffers of the church. At the time, they say the church owned nearly half the city's buildings, power draped in piety, profit designed as penance. A stay at the Spinhuis was a life sentence, even if your body walked out. It was social ruin, grounds for divorce, a mark you could never scrub clean. Women released from its walls had one profession left to them. The streets of Amsterdam knew them as the fallen. The Spinhuis itself burned in 1643, but the fire couldn't kill the idea. 2 years later, it was rebuilt, stronger, harder, more permanent. Over centuries, it shifted faces like a criminal changing coats. Housing political prisoners under Napoleon, serving as a police headquarters, eventually claimed by the University of Amsterdam. But its soul stayed the same. A place where lives were broken and where stories still bleed through the brick. Ghosts cling to the Spinhuis like ivy. Whispers of guilt, desperation, and betrayal echo through its halls. But one story rises above the rest, a tale of forbidden love. Across from the prison stood a rectory where they say a priest gave in to desire. He fell for a young girl, and in the 17th century, young meant far younger than innocence could carry. Their affair was discovered. Her sentence was the Spinhuis. His sentence was silence, protected by the same church that profited from her labor. He returned to his chamber, his view locked forever on the walls that held her. Shame hollowed him out, and a rope gave him release. But in ending his life, he committed the supposed unforgivable. 2 cardinal sins, suicide and forbidden love. They say damnation has a way of chaining itself to the guilty. Guests at the hotel that now stands at the rectory's ground speak of a creaking rope in the night, of a shadow swaying in the darkness where no body should hang. The priest is still there, they say, caught in the loop of his own final moments, repeating it forever as though death itself refused him entry. This was the Spinhuis, a house of punishment where even the dead can't escape their sentence.
Alright, so here we go, the Spinhuis, or spinning house. It was a real institution in Amsterdam, founded as a correctional prison for women and remembered as a place where inmates were put to work in textile labor. Its existence and role as a part of Amsterdam's penal history are well documented, and architect Hendrik de Keyser, famous for shaping much of 17th century Amsterdam, was indeed involved in the design work on this building and many city buildings of this era. Over the centuries, the Spinhuis site was repurposed multiple times, reflecting the shifting needs of the city. However, like our other accounts, much of the dramatic legend that surrounds it today belongs more to folklore than archival record. The oft-told tale of a priest who fell in love with a young girl, her subsequent imprisonment in the Spinhuis, and his suicide that left him doomed to haunt the site, none of it can be traced to verified historical accounts. The detail that the women brewed beer or mustard for church profit is plausible but also not directly confirmed. And the inscription said to be by P.C. Hooft, strong as the hand of punishment, that whole thing, that has never been firmly corroborated. Taken together, the Spinhuis stands as a mix of history and legend. The prison itself was real and notorious, but the perverted tragedy and ghostly repetitions are best understood as part of the city's storytelling tradition rather than proven fact. So this story's another dud? Vinny, I'm happy to say that this one has no evidence. Sadly, the reason the story has stuck is because stories of church abuse among priests are so prevalent. I don't mean that to be offensive to my Catholic friends, but it's no secret there are thousands of accounts that are scarier than any haunting. My opinion is that these sad, sick stories wouldn't be as common if the church didn't force its priests into celibacy. Even the alleged first pope had a wife. How do we know that? Well, because Luke 4, Jesus heals Peter's mother-in-law, his wife's mother. Anyways, concerning the suicide question, if this priest was real, which we have no reason to believe he is, he'd be in hell for being a predator of young girls. If an actual Christian ends their own life, there is no biblical support for the idea that they go straight to hell. If you've repented of your sins and received Christ as Lord and you believe he died and rose for your sins, you're saved according to Romans 10. A Christian can struggle with these thoughts, and if not helped, they may even succumb to them, sadly. But sadly, the Catholic Church has made this some unforgivable sin with no biblical support. If a non-Christian ends their own life, they will be separated from God forever in a place the Bible calls hell, not because they ended their own life, but because they left this world never having repented of their sins and receiving Christ as Lord and Savior. I've had about enough of the Spinhuis. I'd rather move on to the Montelbaanstoren, or simply Montelbaan Tower.
Welcome to the Montelbaanstoren. Built in 1516, it rose out of Amsterdam's hunger. Its hunger to expand, to fortify, to keep the wolves at bay. The city was fat with trade, its ships crawling every sea lane, its warehouses bursting with spoils. Prosperity always paints a target, though, and the walls kept getting pushed outward like a gambler doubling down. This tower was a piece of that gamble, a sentinel against pirates, a barrier against rival merchants, a bulwark against the endless tug-of-war with Utrecht. It was more than stone and mortar. It was a promise that when the alarms rang and the danger came pounding at the gates, there would be somewhere to run. Families huddled under its arches when the city shook. Its spiral stairs promised safety, but legends say that these same steps turned into a death trap. One story tells of an attack from Utrecht's forces. A family fled into the tower, clutching one another as the bombardment rattled the walls. They climbed upward and upward, searching for safety. The higher they climbed, the closer the cannon fire seemed to get. By the time they reached the top, panic had swallowed them whole. The legend ends in silence. The final kind. But legends don't die so easily. They say every year on the 2nd of June, the family climbs once again. The creak of footsteps, the ragged breath of the terrified, and the scrape of shoes on stone. Upward, always upward until the sound cuts out. Then nothing. A loop of fear carved into the spiral, doomed to play forever. 80 years later, the city gave the tower a new face. Hendrik de Keyser, Amsterdam's master of stone, crowned it with a clock and a spire. It should have been a proud, noble marker of progress. Instead, it became a punchline. The tower leaned, they say, the bells told the wrong hour, and the clock spun like it was drunk. Locals laughed, nicknaming it a fool's tower. Restoration crews later straightened it, set the clock right, scrubbed away the ridicule, but the stains never lifted. The Montelbaanstoren still stands, its reflection rippling in the canal like a scar that refuses to close. And every June, if you listen closely, you'll hear them. The family on the stairs, running for their lives in a tower that never let them leave.
The Montelbaanstoren or Montalbaan Tower is a real and well-documented landmark in Amsterdam standing along the Oudeschans Canal. Its base was constructed in 1516 as a part of the city's defensive walls, a reminder of the era when Amsterdam fortified itself against pirates, rival merchants, and regional threats. In 1606, the tower was given its more decorative upper section and spire, designed by the renowned architect Hendrik de Keyser, whose work defined much of the city's Renaissance skyline. Over the centuries, the tower earned the nickname Malle Jaap. It's like saying Mad Jake, as Jaap was a Dutch male short name for Jacob or Jacob. All this owing to the fact that the bell and clock often malfunctioned, ringing at the wrong hours or behaving erratically, a quirk that became part of its identity. Beyond its architectural and historical significance, the Montelbaanstoren is tied to local folklore. One enduring ghost story tells of a family who, during a time of danger, fled into the tower for safety. They panicked and met a tragic death, an event that is said to replay every year, June the 2nd, when their footsteps and cries are said to echo through the spiral staircase. Doc, I know I've been stealing your shine a lot today. Why don't you tell us what the problem here is?
Well, the problem is, while the existence of the tower, its construction dates, De Keyser's additions, and the nickname Mad Jake are historically verified, their more dramatic elements, the Utrecht bombardment narrative, the family's death, the annual reappearance, claims of the tower leaning and later being straightened, well, these all belong firmly in the realm of legend.
Come on, just 'cause we ain't got death certificates don't mean it didn't happen.
But that ain't the only issue, son. We don't have any names, we don't even got a date.
What are you talking about? The June 2nd thing.
Of what year, Vinny? What record do we have that says anything happened to this family? We ain't got a record about the fire in the tower or the bombardment.
Man, this whole road trip is a bust.
Come on, Vinny, don't say that, especially since you sound bummed that a family didn't perish in flames in the tower.
That ain't what I'm saying.
Look, Vinny, Amsterdam is gorgeous. The buildings and the stories are amazing by themselves. Just because we can't find proof of anything supernatural happening doesn't mean the journey is a waste.
But the supernatural ain't that kind of our thing.
No, the truth is our thing. We should want our beliefs to be rooted in truth. And the truth of the matter is, a lot of these stories tied to these places are just that, stories. We can't say for sure it didn't happen, but we have no proof it did. And because we don't have anything to verify these tales, we need to be cautious accepting any supernatural narratives not tied to anything rooted in reality. If we believe every ghost story we hear, we lose credibility entirely.
Well, I think both of y'all lost your minds in credibility some time ago.
Shut up. In any case, the Montelbaanstoren thus stands as a piece of both Amsterdam's tangible history and a vessel for its folklore, where fact and story intertwine. It's now time for our final stop in haunted Amsterdam.
You mean not so haunted Amsterdam?
Shut it. We now arrive at the Weeping Tower.
Yeah, I hope this one is better than the last tower.
I said shut it. I don't need you ticking off our Netherlands listeners.
The city wears its scars like old tattoos. Half faded, half forgotten but never gone. The Schreierstoren, Amsterdam's Weeping Tower, is one of those scars carved into stone. It rose in 1487, part of the city's armor, a jagged corner where walls bent sharp against the docks. It still crouches there today under the shadow of the Basilica of St. Nicholas, its witch's hat roof cutting a silhouette against the sky. Back then, it wasn't built for poetry. It was a lookout, a warning, a fist of brick pointing out to the sea. But people make stories out of stone, and this one bled sorrow. The myth says women stood here on the edge of the harbor, waving their men off to sea, eyes wet as ships slipped into horizons that swallowed half of them whole. A sailor's gamble was brutal. 40% might return. The rest were names and ledgers of bones under foreign tides. The tower became their backdrop, a stage for grief, until someone started calling it the Weeping Tower. The truth is colder. The name was born from a mistranslation. In Old Dutch, Schreierstoren meant sharp corner tower and nothing more. Somewhere along the line, sharpness turned into sorrow and the legend dug in its heels. Yet grief leaves fingerprints. A stone from 1569 tells of a woman who lost her mind the day her husband's death reached her. Maybe one broken heart was enough to turn a corner into a wound. History kept piling on. In 1609, Henry Hudson walked out from here, chasing a northern passage west. Instead, he stumbled onto Manhattan, rewriting maps and planting seeds for what would later become New York. His story didn't end well, though. Mutiny, betrayal, and a slow death adrift with his son. But sometimes history doesn't care how you end, but where you began. For Hudson, it was here, at the foot of the Weeping Tower. Now the old Sentinel has softened. It sells books, beer, and snacks, pretending to be harmless. But step inside, brush your hand along the stone wall, and you'll feel it. Some report the whisper of sounds, low sobs, cries and wails that catch the night air. Tourists talk about heaviness, like the weight of someone else's sorrow pressing against their ribs. A few swear they've seen pale figures, women staring out from the tower's windows or shadows gliding along the canal. Their grief still anchored here centuries later. The Schreierstoren may not really weep, but the city most certainly did weep for her.
Please don't go breaking my heart again. Would you stop being so dramatic? My gosh. So the Schreierstoren is one of Amsterdam's surviving medieval towers built in the late 15th century as part of the city's fortifications, standing on what is now Prince Hendrik Kade, or Prince Henry's Wharf, this referring to Prince Hendrik of the Netherlands, husband of Queen Wilhelmina. It once formed a corner of the old city wall, guarding the harbor and anchoring Amsterdam's defenses against threats from the sea. Its name goes back to the Old Dutch, Schreierstoren, a compound of stre, sharp, hoek, corner, toren, tower. Again, my Netherland friends, I'm sorry for butchering your native tongue. The name was purely descriptive, pointing to the sharp angle of the wall where the tower stood. Over time, however, the sound of stre drifted into popular memory, and the tower became associated with the Dutch verb streien, to weep. Thus, the legend of the Weeping Tower was born. A memorial tablet dating from 1569 still survives inside, recording the story of a woman who supposedly went insane with grief after her husband sailed away. That inscription helped reinforce the romantic legend that wives and lovers stood here in tears as their men departed for voyages that might never return. While moving, this image is folklore rather than documented fact. The truth is that many families did endure loss at sea, and the legend gave voice to a very real collective sorrow. The Weeping Tower also holds a place in global history. You probably caught his name. In 1609, the English navigator Henry Hudson set sail from this vicinity under commission from the Dutch East Indian Company. His voyage led to the exploration of the Hudson River, Hudson Bay, and the eventual founding of what became New York. While his legacy is complicated, he was distrusted by the English, despised by traders and native groups, and eventually mutinied against by his Dutch crew. His journey tied this Amsterdam tower to the larger story of transatlantic exploration and colonialism. Today, the tower is still part of the living city. It has been repurposed as a nautical-themed bookstore and cafe, where visitors can sit with a drink beside the same medieval walls that once watched over departing ships. Historically, the Weeping Tower is a fortress corner turned urban landmark. In legend, it remains a place of tears and longing, a spot where folklore insists that grief still lingers, even if its original name had nothing to do with weeping. So wait a minute. Is it true or not?
It's not.
Well, Vinny, it's complicated.
It's not.
Shut it. Look, Vinny, again, there is no specific woman tied to the commemorative stone, but the entire story is very much rooted in real history and historical danger. Many men did die at sea, creating many widows on the shore. The big question I know you're wondering the most about, is there any validity to the reports of paranormal phenomenon? This isn't the spot where anyone died, but it is a place where many probably really did grieve. Can that grief mark a place? I think grief can leave deep marks. Maybe not on the stones themselves, but perhaps in the atmosphere. In the location, places like the Weeping Tower carry a heaviness, the weight of centuries of women staring out at the harbor and never seeing their husbands come home. Scripture tells us that God keeps our tears in His bottle in Psalm 56. He remembers them, but sometimes it feels as though a place can remember as well. Does sorrow soak into the mortar, or is it the human heart that projects its pain back onto the walls? Honestly, I don't think the dead are wandering back to the tower, but that doesn't mean a place of grief can't feel haunted. It's not the voices of the departed that cry here, it's the echo of a fallen world where death reigns until Christ returns. Could the enemy exploit that sorrow, play it back like a broken record to stir fear? Perhaps. This is why it's important to remember that Paul warns us not to give the devil a foothold in Ephesians 4. And grief is a fertile ground for despair if it isn't handed to God. So when people say they hear weeping near the tower, maybe they're not wrong. Maybe they're brushing up against centuries of human heartache, magnified, twisted, and replayed by forces that thrive on sorrow. Not ghosts, not widows returned from the grave, just a city remembering its tears.
Yeah, real touching. So is that it? Like for real, that's it?
I'm sorry Amsterdam is not pouring with blood and screams, Vinny.
It's just a bunch of sad stories instead of specters, and I got history instead of hauntings.
Maybe these places weren't as terrifying as Enfield, I'll give you that, but they were still fascinating. And like I said, truth has to matter most.
Yeah.
This is a podcast, not a travel agency. I'm not trying to embellish these places to sell tours or tickets. Some places carry a weight that doesn't need apparitions to announce itself. You step into a square where men were executed, or into a prison where women spent their lives spinning thread in captivity, and the atmosphere is different, specters or not. Even without a single ghost attached, history presses down on you. It's the echo of human lives compressed into stone. Every generation leaves its fingerprints, wars fought, families broken, judgments passed, tears shed. A tower or alley becomes more than architecture. It becomes a container of memory. Whether the supernatural is involved or not, the natural history alone can make your chest tighten, your steps slow. Think about Jerusalem, Rome, or even Gettysburg over in the US. The soil itself has been steeped in blood and prayers and screams. Standing there, you don't need chains rattling to sense a heaviness. As Christians, we'd say it's the marks of a fallen world. The way sin and death carve grooves into the creation itself. Romans 8 tells us creation groans. Some sights may groan louder than others. This is why a place can feel haunted even if it isn't in a traditional sense, that is. Not because spirits are pacing the halls, but because the past is still whispering. And if grief, injustice, and violence can leave that mark, then so can redemption. Worship, prayer, and mercy can reshape the atmosphere of a place just as much as blood and cruelty once did.
Well, I still think you should have covered the Flying Dutchman or something.
Don't worry, Vinny, we'll get there soon enough. I have been Nelly, and this has been the 39th episode of The Dancing Toaster. If our tales today stirred you, please share this episode. That's how other people are going to find out about the show. Please continue to share it with friends who love history and a few good mysteries. If you want to help me continue to do deep dives like this, please join the Toasties on Patreon and help me keep the lights on. Links for everything, as always, are in the show description. For my beloved listeners in the Netherlands, I hope I did the tales justice, and I hope you can forgive me for my bad pronunciation. Thank you for the hospitality, and as always, I want to thank all of you for listening to The Dancing Toaster. Where are we going next? Well, you'll have to come back and see, because I have no idea. We'll all be surprised, as I barely made it through this last week. I hope you all enjoyed our trip around the top 5 countries where people are tuning into The Dancing Toaster. But no matter where you're tuning in, please like, share, subscribe, comment, leave me a stinking review, follow, do all the things wherever you consume The Dancing Toaster. But whatever you do, don't consume toasters, and don't let any bloody streets consume you. I love you. I'm out.
Report suspicious activities and call 911 for immediate response. Expect delay.
Nobody else booking tags in from the south. Stand by. Flight 022. Maintain approach. You're clear for
Expect traffic delay and restrictions. Take personal security precautions to avoid becoming a victim of an attack. Avoid crowded public areas and gatherings. Not travel in areas affected by the attack or in a known area elevated virus activity. Keep emergency supplies accessible and upholding a gas at all times.
Be careful.
Government officials